grades in GCSEs, but does it also impact on their social behaviour? Andrew Shabilsky is an experimental psychologist based at the Oxford Internet Institute, who's researched the impact of screen time and gaming.
There definitely are concerns about whether or not specific types of screen time might relate to children acting out or being hyperactive. Some research shows some correlations, so there may be some links between amounts of screen time and children acting out, but the thing to remember about these links is that they're very, very small. They're very weak. We're talking about maybe 1% of how much a child acts out might be correlated with how much screen time they engage in. And when you kind of do a study that more carefully controls for things that we know influence hyperactivity, things like diet or other background factors in a young person's life, the correlation for something like screen time fails to be statistically significant. So in my own research, I found that young people who play video games, let's say for about an hour a day, they tend to look a bit better off than children who either don't play video games or who play video games loads, so more than, let's say, 3 hours a day. And that's basically in terms of things, again, like their attention or their hyperactivity. On the high end, when young people say they're playing more than 3 hours a day, those kids tend to look a bit worse. But the thing to understand here is not necessarily that there's something going on with video games per se. It might be the case that if they did any activity for 3 hours a day, it would kind of crowd out some positive opportunities. It's definitely the case that, like movies and films and play, there are as many different kinds of games and many different kinds of gaming experiences that parents might worry about. My own work indicates that some kinds of games, like collaborative and competitive games, are associated with better levels of peer adjustment. In this case, in this study, collaborative games were games like Minecraft and some competitive games like World of Warcraft. You kind of have to balance your schedule and your friend's schedule to get together and play games online. I haven't found convincing evidence that games that maybe parents are worried about, violent games per se, are related to the functioning of young people, but that not being able to find a connection doesn't mean one doesn't exist. My main recommendation, and this is speaking as a parent myself and as a scientist, is to play games with your young person. I think time spent with the young person either in their room or playing alone really is an opportunity that's wasted in terms of a parenting interaction. Games don't need to be mysterious. They really can be something that parents can kind of address head on.
Penny, Andrew's research would seem to run contrary to what a lot of parents might believe. Screen time, whether it's computer games or TV shows, must have more than a minimal impact.
Well, I think they do. I like children to actually use their own imagination rather than looking at a screen which has been created by someone else's imagination. And I very much for children going into their bedroom, creating a camp, using their imagination, having to work out how they're going to do it with perhaps another child in the house or friends around. I mean, I find that as much more important. I would like, and I know my children can look back and think, we had a great childhood doing this, and having fun things, not looking back and thinking, what did I do? I looked at the screen for most of my childhood. I think that's right, Stephen, isn't it?
Yeah, so I completely agree with that, and we did a study where we looked at the amount of times parents spent doing some kind of face-to-face interactive game and the association with behaviour problems, and if they were spending at least half an hour every 2 days, not a lot, but something, there was a lower level of behaviour problems with that. And I think it's how you play with them. Sensitive responding, the way in which you play, you meet somebody's needs, and that's a two-way thing. And a recent study, ours and the American ones, the degree to which you're sensitive and have that lovely goo-goo gaga, that game of tennis across the net mentally at 3 predicts how well your children when they're 32 will do academically and the quality of their love relationships.
Oliver, you're nodding away there, but there are always concerns about how new technology influences behaviour. And I was just thinking of my own daughter who's 11, having watched all 6 seasons of Modern Family, much to my chagrin. She is indistinguishable now from an American high school queen. You know, it's all like and whatever, and the rolling of the eyes. Or if you look back a couple of decades, you know, there were the much publicised concerns about violent films leading to violent behaviour in young people. So it's understandable, isn't it, that parents look to new technology and see it perhaps as the enemy rather than as a friend?
Yes, I mean, I think as a parent, you obviously want to try and sort of make your preferences clear to them. But an awful lot depends on what's been going on in the family and why. What you've got to ask, what is the meaning of the child's watching and why they watch for so long or for so short or not at all, and how we get them, as Penny and I would totally agree, get them actually just engaging in enjoyable fantasy play when they're small, enjoying each other's company with other children, or preferably with their siblings, very likely.
Killing their siblings.
But I mean, if you take I did take the anecdotal example of my son. He started off on Clash of the Clans. You thought, oh God, what is this nonsense? And it's all parents of all generations have always felt that. And I think in the case of my son, he progressed, I'm happy to say, from Clash of the Clans to a football game that you play interactively. I won't name it. And he and I now spend a lot of time happily sitting doing that. And he gets bored with it after, he just gets bored with it and wants to go off. And he's still aged 10 and a half, I hope you'll forgive me for saying this, loves at last thing at night to go and play with his little Lego men in some kind of fantasy. I know God knows what he's getting up to, but they're not killing each other in fantasy.
Earlier we discussed the role of table manners, but actually what we choose to feed our children is probably more important and influential on their behaviour than regular nagging to hold a knife properly or say please when demanding more ketchup. Research into the role of nutrition continues to identify links between what children eat and how they act. Dr. Alex Richardson is co-founder of the charity Food and Behaviour Research.
When it comes to the impact of nutrition on behaviour, there are really three broad areas that certainly any parent or schools could do with considering. One of them is to do with the possible impact of some artificial additives. There's controlled trial evidence now showing that certainly for children who have actual behaviour problems like ADHD type symptoms, some of the artificial food colourings can indeed have a detrimental effect on their behaviour and their concentration, but also on their sleep. In the general population, there have also been controlled trials done. Those did show that a cocktail of quite common artificial food colourings and one common preservative did indeed impair both the behaviour and the concentration of children from the general population. And yet, certainly in the UK, these artificial food colourings have not yet been banned. There is in the small print a warning on some products that contain these. The second area that I think almost everyone would do better if they were to realise how much impact things like sugar and refined carbohydrates can have. We are not saying, and studies do not support, that a dose of sugar in the short term will impair, your behaviour and concentration. In fact, ironically, it'll probably make it somewhat better. However, these can put you on what's been called a blood sugar yo-yo, where your blood sugar, rather than staying in a nice limited range, which is ideal, overshoots and then comes crashing down again. Low blood sugar is going to impair anybody's mood and their behaviour and their ability to concentrate. So going for whole foods, going for foods where the carbohydrate, the starch content, is unrefined, so that it breaks down and releases the glucose more slowly. Things like oats as your breakfast cereal, rather than the sugary, refined grain cereals that basically take up most of the aisles in the supermarket. Now, the area of the diet most people absolutely don't understand is to do with dietary fats. The brain, it's 60% fat. It is the fat-rich organ, that underlies all of our behaviour, and its composition reflects the fats in our diets. So if we don't get those right, there's no way that our brains are going to be able to function properly. The bad fats that we really should be, quite frankly, banning are trans fats. These are still found in not just baked cakes, pastries, biscuits and things, but also a whole range of sauces, soups, salad dressings. They've been linked with aggression. They've been linked more recently with impaired memory functioning. So getting rid of any products that may contain hydrogenated vegetable oils, that should be a priority.
Oliver, nutrition is an area with a far longer research history than the effects of screen time, for example. Are you convinced?
Well, I think that there's definitely some evidence for it, but I think the danger that we all run in getting too carried away with this is that parents use it quite often as a way of distracting themselves from the pattern of nurture that they're providing.
Are we stuffing our children full of poisons that are affecting their behaviour, Stephen?
I think all stories about diet need to be taken with a good pinch of salt. There've been about 40 trials of additives where you take children into hospital and give them capsules with and without, fizzy lemon and E-numbers. Nearly all of them don't come up with any effect. Very, very few children are genuinely. Often it's because they're allergic. More generally, they might have eczema or diarrhoea, and that's it.
I think it's really important when we hear these things about nutrition or screen time or any of these things, that we realise the context within which this research and these findings are. And actually, our children are surrounded by lots of different environments that are very important. So if we go back to screen time just for a moment, we need to look at what else is going on in the home. So I have a 10, nearly 11-year-old. She has screen time, but she has a limited screen time, and it's about whether I give her other attention. I'm a working parent. Do I only give her screen time? No, I give her my attention, and I think that's what's important.
Well, we've looked at some of the possible causes of bad behaviour and some of the powerful influences on children. But despite every good intention, every parent at some point faces a child who won't do what you want them to do. And if this happens on a regular or a daily basis, it's highly destructive. So what are the solutions? What are the practical things we can do? Earlier we heard from Jennifer trying to cope with her 2 daughters. Here's how she resolved her difficulties.
At school, one of the teachers actually came over to me and she said, "Look, Jenny, we're running this family nurturing programme course through Family Links. And I think it'd be a really good idea for you, to come and join us and see what it's all about." I felt I'm a failure as a mum, I'm not good enough, and that's why they're asking me to do this. But she reassured me straight away and sort of explained it's not about that. It's about you gaining the control back, and giving you the strategies to be able to cope. And every week they cover a kind of topic, and it goes from building blocks to life to good behaviour, ground rules. I got my girls involved with doing a lot of ground rules, where they've made up their own rules, what did they want, what didn't they want.
There's not that many arguments now because we have the rules, and it's just really easier because we won't have to argue that much.
You have 2 children, you have one iPad. The arguments could have, were quite immense at times. Problem solving there is, right, girls, you can either, take it in turns and have the iPad for 5 minutes each, so you both get a turn. But if you continue to argue, neither of you will be playing on it. And it was like, it's such a simple thing, and it works.
I think it's better because now we know that what we need to do in order to earn something or to really help mum out in the morning. So getting dressed at school is an important thing because it helps mum out so she doesn't have to rush around making sure that we're dressed, that we're ready. And otherwise it just got very mixed up, so no one knew what to do. We didn't know this was a bad thing or a good thing.
A lot of things are like praising the good and praising for being. I think I was concentrating on what was negative and slowly just getting used to implementing slow changes, and I think they were more comfortable with that rather than doing everything at once because, you start building that inner resistance up a little bit and that, rebelling. And we are a much happier family, aren't we? And we get on so well.
A happy ending. There are any number of parenting classes, some of them free, available across the country, and you can find further details on our website. But when the coalition government trialled free parenting classes in a scheme called Can Parent, take-up was relatively low, particularly among fathers. Only 9% of those who participated were men, but 94% of the parents who took part recommended the experience. Suggesting, Stephen, that what Jennifer experienced is a common reaction, that feeling that attending a parenting class means that you're a bit of a failure as a parent. So how do you go about persuading parents that the classes are worth taking, particularly parents whose previous experience perhaps of class-based learning might not have been very positive?
Yeah, and I think that's really good important because all men are good drivers and all parents are good parents. So the notion that we might need to just tweak it up a bit. And this is a very sensitive negotiation. As Jennifer said, you come in feeling a bit blamed and things like that. But to then learn that actually no man is an island, that children respond to the environment around them. But I'd add, we need love and limits. not shouty limits, but firm limits. And I think that's what these good parenting classes, and they're not all the same, teach. And I think she gained a great deal from that.
It clearly worked for Jennifer, but is there any evidence at all that this sort of approach could work more widely?
Yes, there have been trials with, about 60 randomised control trials with tens of thousands of children showing that it works for about 3/4 of people. This is different from an old school notion, which when I was training in this field was that there's something wrong with the child. There must be some terrible internal conflict. It's what I call the Boyle theory of bad behaviour. You're going to go in there, you're going to sit in that and go, pfft, and all this...
Thank you for the sound effect.
All this bad stuff will come out, and then you'll return them to the parent as well behaved. And there isn't a notion of the interactive behaviour notion.
Bonamy, does that kind of research that Stephen's talking about, apart from the Boyle aspect, chime with your own work at the Nurture Lab?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the important thing is that there's an awful lot of stuff that parents can get from the internet and from friends and from family, not all of it helpful and not all of it evidence-based. And the important thing for parents to realise is that, you know, aiming for something that's got some evidence behind it, as Stephen said, is so important. But also that just being individually sensitive to your child's needs. There isn't a sort of one-size-fits-all characteristic to parenting. There are general things that work really nicely, so positive parenting works, and you know, lots of things that are generally good for children. But I also think that there are some parenting strategies, for example, time out, that works for some children and not others, and to be aware of your children and their needs and to understand them and learn to know them well is key.
Oliver, if you're asked for practical solutions to badly behaved children, what do you suggest? There's the love bomb. Tell me more.
Okay. Well, that idea does have some scientific basis, although my specific thing hasn't been ever tested. But my specific thing is to say, take the child away, build up to it, take the child away from the rest of the family. It could be only for an afternoon, but it could preferably for a night or 2 nights. And you tell the child that it is in control, and obviously you try and tell the child that you love it as much as possible, even if you hate its guts at this point, because you're so fed up with its horrible behaviour. And it's staggering how much effect that can have. And I'm not pretending it can cure everything for everyone, but I'm amazed by what a variety of, and it seems to affect probably the fight-flight hormone, cortisol. It seems to reset the emotional thermostat in that sense. The child comes back much calmer, and then if there are top-ups, hundreds of parents have done this and reported back to me. Many people have bought the book and tried it. And what I would say is, though, that is not, of course, the only solution. It's not a practical solution for everyone. There's no doubt that parenting classes are enormously helpful. Everybody, without exception, could benefit from them. And in that sense, there is a level at which we can be taught. As adults, we can be taught, we can learn. The only plea I would make is, you know, I've had one particular story I can tell you of 6 generations of mothers who basically were traumatizing and tyrannizing their daughters and neglecting them. And when I then treated as a psychotherapist that woman, she was able to stop behaving in that way